But at this point, I'm now joined by Dr. Joshua Bamfo, our partner at the head of the transfer pricing services practicing at Andersen in Nigeria, and he will be unpacking this for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Bamfo, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm sure you heard what one of the vendors there said at the market, even as we look at the issue around the hike in inflation figures in the country. Now, headline inflation rate increased to 31.70% in February from 29.90% in January. Looking at all what has been said, how would you say these issues have actually significantly impacted the numbers during this period?
Thank you. Clearly, I think whoever was interviewed was spot on. I mean, I think he might have some knowledge of economics. But if you look at what we are experiencing today, it's pretty alarming. You have to go back to sometime in January of 2023. Inflation was deemed to be very high even then. At the time, inflation rate was around 21.8%. As of February 2023, it was around 21.9%. You fast forward it to January, as you rightly said, of 2024, a year after, we saw inflation rate at 29.9%. And that was deemed to be extremely high. And that's the reason why Central Bank of Nigeria actually tried to take measures to intervene to bring it down a little bit. We saw the monetary policy rate increase significantly from 18.75 in July to 22.75. But for it to have actually increased to 31.7% in February is pretty significant. And you can actually feel the impact on individuals in the household sector, as well as firms in the business sector. For individuals, that means that cost of living has gone up significantly. So for an individual that already has a job but hasn't gotten a commensurate increase in salaries, cost of living will mean that a high cost of living will mean that now they can purchase lesser of the goods and services they need compared to before. If you don't have a job, then that's even the worst case scenario. You already don't have a job, but the average prices of goods and services, especially necessities such as food, have gone up significantly. As you rightly said, when you look at food inflation, it's even higher than the headline inflation of 31.7%. Food inflation is around 37.1%. So clearly, all these add up to the misery or the suffering of the people. If you're in the business sector, it still impacts you. Your inputs, whether it's raw material, whatever it is, in order to produce have gone up, which means that you will then have to find ways and means to pass on those increased input costs in the form of higher prices of your final product to final consumers. And it's not all the case that you are able to successfully do that, because if there isn't a commensurate demand for your product, then those products will not be sold in the marketplace, as we saw in the video that you showed earlier. So clearly, this has led to an adverse impact, not only to individuals, but also to businesses, and this is of grave concern to the economy as a whole.
Just as you've mentioned, the MPC increased the benchmark interest rate by 400 basis points to 22.75%, and that's part of what is needed to actually rein in inflation, according to the Apex Bank. But then when are we supposed to start seeing its impact on inflation numbers?
So clearly, the increase by 400 basis points was significant. I mean, it came as a surprise to some. For some economists, it wasn't too much of a surprise, but that was very significant. However, the potential impact can be analyzed from two perspectives. First and foremost, an increase in monetary policy rate is supposed to be a signaling effect for other interest rates in the market to also increase likewise. And that's the reason why it's a benchmark rate. So with the increase in other interest rates in the marketplace, what is then going to happen is that cost of borrowing is more expensive. So you have individuals and businesses, be more reluctant to be a little bit more reluctant to borrow from the banks and to spend. All right. So what it tries to do is then to curb demand and therefore help stabilize average prices of goods and services. However, you bear with me that the transmission mechanism in a country like Nigeria, where it's a cash economy as opposed to a credit economy compared to the likes of the US, will not have the same impact, because even if you increase the cost of borrowing and people spend based on cash that they have, then that impact will not be as impactful as compared to economies where people spend more based on credit or loans from banks. So that is one reason why we've not seen an immediate effect. The other reason, which is more important, is for us to understand the sources of inflation in the nation today. There are about 4 major reasons why we have high inflation today. And 3 of them mainly are from the supply side as opposed to demand side. So the first factor you can think about is, food insecurity. And because of food insecurity, we have the prices of agricultural products going up. So this is a supply issue, a shortage of supply of agricultural products. The second has to do with the removal of fuel subsidy, which has increased the cost of transportation of some of these products from the hinterlands to the urban areas. This is also a supply side issue, which has actually increased the input cost or the supply cost of supplying these particular products. The third element that you can think about has to do with the volatility of the exchange rate. The exchange rate has depreciated significantly compared to from June 2023 to today. With that high level of depreciation, what is going to happen is that for importation of inputs or importation of finished products to sell onto consumers, these are going to cost us more. So this is another supply side issue. So if you then increase interest rate, which is supposed to curb demand for goods and services, but you've not addressed any of these supply side issues, no matter how you increase the MPR, you're not going to have that desired effect in the short term. So we've always recommended a combination of monetary policy, which is being managed by the Central Bank of Nigeria, and fiscal policy, which is managed by the Ministry of Finance as representative of the federal government, in order to curb this. If not, we are not going to get immediate results. Yes, the increase in MPR has signaled the fact that CBN actually sees the management of inflation rate as a very paramount issue. However, because the increase in monetary policy rate cannot solve the whole problem, we are not going to see immediate results in the short term. But over time, if we're able to enact other fiscal policies, that would actually help the monetary policy become more effective. There we can see inflation stabilize and over time start going down to the target that they hope to have by the end of the year, which is around 21%.
Okay, yeah, you've actually mentioned a couple of things that needs to be done in terms of policies to be implemented, but then we see that as far as the Nigerian government has gone, we've not really seen any drastic change. You said it's going to take time, but let's see how it affects other areas now. We know that notable price rises we're actually seeing in passenger road transport, housing rentals, both actual and imputed, medical services, pharmaceutical products, and all that, and people having to pay more for these services. So when we look at what the government has done so far, is it a time that we start seeing actions geared towards addressing these issues drastically? Because some people have said that these measures do not directly or frontally correct these anomalies in the economy. So what do you think should obtain in a saner climate?
So I fully agree with you. I think the government should be more direct and intentional in addressing some of these issues. So as I said, food inflation is on the rise. It's around 37%. So clearly the insecurity issue has to be addressed, and that cannot be addressed by the CBN. It has to be addressed by the government. So government has to pay particular attention to addressing these insecurity issues so that the regions that actually produce these products can actually produce at its optimal level and be able to then transport it to other parts of the nation for consumption. So clearly, there should be emphasis on dealing with the insecurity issues in the regions where food production actually occur. The second element has to do with the fuel subsidy removal. The question is, yes, on paper, it's a technically sound policy, but the timing of its implementation, how it was implemented, has to be looked into. A lot of economists advocated for a phased approach where you don't do a total removal from day one because inflation rate was already on the high side as at the time that the new administration took over and implemented this policy far back in June 2023. I think we really need to relook it and see whether some management of that fuel subsidy can be done so that the petroleum product cost doesn't adversely affect the transportation of these food products from the hinterlands to the urban areas. So that should be some direct intervention that the government can actually deal with. The other bit, which now goes to CBN because it's a monetary policy issue, has to do with exchange rate. We know that the CBN has actually moved from a fixed exchange rate regime to a more floating exchange rate regime, allowing for market forces to determine the price of, for foreign hard currencies. However, there might be the need for some intervention because studies have shown that the naira, as of today, seems to be undervalued, which means that if we were to intervene and set the price a bit lower towards 1,000 naira to $1, that should actually set some level of what the equilibrium price should be. So I think it's about time we need to reconsider whether the government shouldn't have some responsible intervention in terms of setting of prices within the foreign exchange market. We've had studies from institutions such as Goldman Sachs that believe that even without government directly intervening, we hope that the exchange rate would drop below 1,200 naira by the end of the year. But that is assuming all factors remain constant, and we really cannot predict. So I think government has to be a bit more open-minded to potential responsible intervention to actually bring the price of foreign currencies down, because if not, this inflation rate is going to persist. The last bit has to do with the adverse impact of the ways and means advances that the previous administration got, which actually led to excess supply of money into the system. The Central Bank of Nigeria is actually doing a decent job of mopping up excess liquidity, and that's the reason why the monetary policy rate was increased from 18.75 to 22.75. The cash reserve ratio has also increased from 30% to about 45%, which will limit the bank's ability to give out loans. There's also been some open market operations to make sure that they've mopped up excess liquidity in the banking system. So by and large, I think these are some of policies that needs to be implemented, both from the fiscal policy side as well as monetary policy side, for us to get some desired results. And hopefully government will take up the challenge and address these short-term measures as quickly as possible. We know that there are going to be some long-term measures that needs to still be implemented: infrastructure development, restructuring of the economy to be more export-oriented and import substituting. But those are more medium to long-term. But these are some short-term measures that can be implemented in order to curb inflation and make people's cost of living much better than we are facing today.
Okay, let's still stay with the issue around Forex just about a few seconds. Now, between June 2023, when the foreign exchange market was liberalized, and mid-February 2024, the Naira depreciated by 69%. We all know that. Now, while this has led to a considerable rise in import costs, has it encouraged exports in any way? And where do we put it? Is it part of a short-term goal or a long-term goal? Because we know that as at the inception of the floating of the foreign exchange regime, this was part of the things that the government and the CBN said we would begin to see.
All right, so clearly, I think the objective of the CBN when they decided to move away from a more fixed exchange rate regime to a more free floating exchange regime was to deal with some of the adverse consequences of having a fixed exchange rate regime. Because what we saw under the previous administration was a huge variance between the official rate and the power market, leading to some rent-seeking behavior such as round tripping, which led to a less appropriate allocation of resources. So clearly, by moving to a more floating exchange rate regime, what you are doing is that allowing market forces, that is demand and supply of Forex, to then determine what the price should be, which is the exchange rate. But that said, even though they've been able to achieve some level of convergence between the official rate and the power market rate, what we've seen is that it has come at a huge cost due to the significant depreciation of the Naira from June 2023 to today. Prior to the current administration, the official rate was around 450 Naira to $1. Power market would have been around 700 Naira to $1. Today, both are hovering around 1,600 Naira to $1. And that has come with adverse impacts such as high inflation. I think what is going to be important is that, first and foremost, a weak Naira doesn't really benefit us as an export and our exports, because most of our exports are raw materials and we are just price takers. We don't determine the price. Big players in the international market, such as China, such as Japan, have an incentive to have a weak currency because they are export oriented and they tend to control significant portions of that international market. So by depreciating their currency, what then happens is that it makes their exports cheaper, and there's a commensurate increase in demand for their products. All right. But that is not in our case. What we need to be doing is to ensure that, yes, we want to export more as a country, but we want to export products that with added value so that we can command better pricing. We want to ensure that we have backward integration, to have some import substitution so that we don't import as much as, too in excess, all right, which can then affect our demand for forex. So by and large, I don't think that there's been, some positive impact on exports just because we've had a fast depreciating naira. However, in order to address this volatility of the exchange rate, it's important that we restructure our economy to be more export-oriented. And even in terms of the export orientation, we move away from overdependence of export of raw materials to exports that are value added, all right, which then we can actually be able to control the pricing a little bit. And that can help deal with the exchange rate issues while doing some import substitution and policies to ensure that we don't over-import, which then puts a lot of pressure on our forex. So in my view, there hasn't been any strong positive impact on exports just because we've had a depreciation in the naira.
Well, with all this being said, and different efforts being put in place by the CBN, of course, they are hoping, or the apex banks are actually hoping that inflationary pressure would actually decline in 2024. And that is what a whole lot of people, most especially Nigerians, are hoping for. Even the marketers, all the marketers have come out to say that if the Port Harcourt refinery picks up in the next 2 weeks, that would also reduce the price of petrol. That would also, in a way, reduce inflationary pressure on the economy. Thank you so much, Dr. Josh Bamfo, partner and head of the Transfer Pricing Services Practice, Andersen in Nigeria. It was nice talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll go on a short break on Business Edge. When we return, we'll look at other areas.